anybody who's done any sort of spiritual work knows that that type of forcing is actually creating resistance, is creating separation from the thing that you want. And so you're creating that gap from experiencing it. And the universe loves when you trust and detach and let go. And you're like, you know what? I have this desire. I have this vision. I'm honed in on it. And I don't care how it happens. I'm open to receiving however it comes about. Can you bring yourself to be in the position of knowing what that feels like and feeling the feelings in your body, like somatically, like you're saying, of what does this feel like? What emotions and experiences does this bring for me to be there? Because that's the only way that you're going to be able to attract it.
Welcome to the Embrace and Expand podcast, where we talk about everything from spirituality, self-development, relationships, mindfulness, wellness, and everything that will help you embrace all that you are so you can expand into the best version of yourself. Hello, everyone. My name is Adam Carberry, and I want to welcome you back for another episode of the Embrace and Expand podcast. Our guest on this episode is a professional athlete and mindset coach. As a lifelong athlete playing 2 Division I sports, field hockey and track, she had her sights set on representing Team USA. However, life had other plans, and she found herself diagnosed with a life-threatening disease, leading doctors to tell her that she would never be an athlete again. Instead of giving up, she chose to tell herself a different story and fought back to find herself as a 2-time track record holder and being ranked as high as 8th in the world. She now focuses on working with other athletes to harness the power within by changing the stories that they're telling themselves and providing her own story that anything is possible with hard work, self-belief, and determination. It is an honor to introduce you to Megan the Savage Henry. Megan, welcome to the Embrace and Expand podcast.
Thank you. I'm going to take that clip and I'm just going to use it everywhere because that was very great. Thank you.
That's one of the things I really enjoy about this podcast is creating those intros to help bring people fully into the present and really highlight what it is all about. So, Megan, why don't you take a few moments to briefly tell myself and the listeners a little bit about your backstory and maybe dive into a little bit about what I just touched on.
Definitely. So I've been an athlete my entire life. I was fortunate to be blessed with athleticism and talent from my father, largely, who's a really successful athlete as well. And I think that we all come to the planet with different gifts and different desires. And that was ultimately mine, which was nurture. Part of it was definitely from nurture. And I think I innately have that as well, which is a little bit shocking because I am usually an introvert. So I tell people I'm an extroverted introvert. And so when I was growing up, I was really shy kid. And however, I always was drawn to sports and wanting to perform and excel. And I saw myself a lot as an underdog. And so I knew at a pretty young age, in middle school or so, that I wanted to play sports in college. And so I was really driven to do that. I pursued different camps and, all of the things to get better and get recruited and go to school and all of that. And when I was going to graduate I went to American University in Washington, D.C., and I was going to graduate. And field hockey is a fall sport. I walked onto the track team because I wasn't quite finished with competing yet. And I joined the Army after I graduated. And I just saw it as another avenue to push myself and challenge myself both physically and mentally. And in that time, I was recruited to try bobsled. And for those listening, I'm very small. I'm 5'2". I'm 120 pounds, and bobsled women are much taller and much heavier than that. So they're usually 5'7", 170 plus pounds. So I was in the wrong place. However, they told me just, based off of my athleticism and everything, to look into skeleton. And so after this happened after my first entry into the military. So I joined the Army Reserve so that I could get my master's degree at the same time. And in that whole process, I was recruited. And so I went and I was wearing something that said like the Army on it. And they told me that there's something called the Army World Class Athlete Program. So if you show the potential to be a national level athlete with the potential to make an Olympic team, the Army wants you to compete and represent them. So I applied for this program and I got in, which was awesome. And so I spent over a decade competing in skeleton for Team USA and also in and out of the Army World Class Athlete Program. And what really brought me to the mental side of things is because early on in my career, while I had all of the athleticism and natural, like raw talent to do well, there was a very big disconnect between the results that I was getting and the results that I thought I should be getting. And so, and I was really, really being a perfectionist, and I was really over analytical. And anybody who's done any sort of spiritual work knows that that type of forcing is actually creating resistance, is creating separation from the thing that you want. And so you're creating that gap from experiencing it. And so I also had a lot of negative self-talk, a lot of comparison to my competitors and teammates. And I was like, well, I'm doing so much more work than them. You know, there's a lot of ego involved there too. And so I had realized that my own mindset was what was inhibiting me from achieving the things that I wanted to achieve. And I took a long road into like self-development and meditation and mindfulness, and it totally changed who I was as a person. It changed the things and the circumstances that I was able to attract into my life. And so I'm forever grateful for skeleton for giving me that opportunity to know myself better. And so now that I'm like on the other side of competing, and at least in skeleton anyway, I feel like I'll always compete in something. That is my passion, is to help other people, because it made such a difference to me. It totally changed my trajectory. And I just feel like there's a lot of suffering. I made myself suffer so much with the thoughts that I had and the stories that I was telling. And even, the people that were surrounding me. Ultimately, one of the reasons why I retired was, I didn't make an Olympic team this past year, and I had felt like I finished that chapter in my life. It was very bittersweet. It was sad. Yeah, I still felt like I was okay to move on, because ironically, and this isn't like directed at anybody, but an environment like that can come from a lot of lack. Like an Olympic sport, it's a couple of people make the team. It's once every 4 years. No one has any money. And so I started to like recognize what are the stories that everyone around me is telling and that I am absorbing, really. And that I didn't want to be around that anymore. I want to live a life of abundance in terms of health and relationships and everything. And so, I want to help athletes and others be able to create that success and recognize that the power of their words. So that was a long answer, but
and I think it's such a fantastic viewpoint that you're putting a spotlight on this, to where many of us look at professional athletes and are like, they've got it all. You know, they're elite performers. You look outside looking in and you expect that they have all kinds of money because they're doing all of this training and going through, when the reality is they're just like us. They're just like the regular person. They deal with this voice inside of their head that's telling them you're not good enough, so you have to push that much more. You have to strive to be better. You have to try and control every little aspect of your life to make you be this elite performer. And I love that you touched on that. It's through that control where it's almost like we actually lose control of our life. We start to hinder what can actually flow, the opportunities, the people, the finances, abundance. All of that begins to get bottlenecked, if you will, based upon our want and desire to control every possible outcome.
I totally agree with that. And so the interesting irony of what happened like in my career. So I had this pretty lame start to the career in terms of I wasn't getting the results that I wanted. I did actually, I earned a national championship title early on in my career. And then I had experienced blood clots. So I got it from my birth control. I was out for a year. And like you mentioned in your wonderful intro, I was told that I might not ever be an athlete ever again. And I think that was ultimately what caused a big shift in me to be like, okay, I don't like that story. I prefer a different story. And that's really what I focused on. And so it helped propel my, my self-awareness and knowing myself and changing that trajectory for me and really focusing on like, well, what is it that I do want and who am I? Because if I'm not an athlete, then who am I? And that was really scary at the time. And you see, I had a number of teammates who, I mean, they just absolutely went mental when they didn't make an Olympic team. They lost sight of who they were. And they didn't think that they had value outside of the sport, which is so sad. And I was one of those people that did control. And I even do that now. Like I still, I find it rewarding. Like there's certainly a tipping point. Like it's rewarding to control certain aspects that you can control. However, what ended up being like the reason why I did not make an Olympic team was because I almost went full circle. I came back to like this old version of myself where I was so attached to previous outcomes that I had in races. I was really, really attached to rankings and things like that. So I sat out again a whole year leading up to the Olympic year, which if you had a choice, you would not do because you lose momentum and feeling and skeleton. You only do 6 months out of the year. So it's, it's difficult to maintain proficiency. I did a ton of visualization and all of these things. However, I was so attached to my previous outcomes. So I like you mentioned, I finished as high as 8th in the world. I was number 1 in the US at the time. And so I was like, well, last year in this race, I finished here. So I should finish there or better this year. And then when I didn't do that, I was like, oh my God, I just started to panic. I really, really put so much emphasis on the, those outcomes every individual race. And whereas if I was just like, the main goal is that I want to make this Olympic team and I trust that I will get there. Whatever happens, happens. Rather than having this like crazy emotional roller coaster up and down, it was so stressful to live like that. And so I retired from skeleton and then I went and competed in a Olympic weightlifting competition in March of this year. And I had gone into this competition. I had been away from competing for a year. So it was like exciting, also a little bit nerve wracking, which I tell people is still excitement. And I went into it with these very specific goals. So in weightlifting, you get 3 attempts at a snatch and 3 attempts at a clean and jerk. So I was like, I'm going to go 6 for 6. I'm going to PR in my snatch. I'm going to PR in my clean and jerk. I'm going to visualize these lifts and I'm going to get all these things. And when I got there, I had this realization that I was like, I don't actually care if I do that because I just want this title. I want to be, so I was competing for a national championship title in masters weightlifting. And so I was like, I want the title. I don't need to control the outcome. I trust that my coach, whatever he tells me, what's on the bar, I trust that I will get there. And I ended up failing one of my snatch attempts. And I could have easily done the same thing I did the Olympic year and been just totally derailed by the fact that I didn't make this attempt and was like, well, oh my gosh, that's it. And that's, that's not necessarily true. So I was able to, although not in the same level of competition capacity as, an Olympic team, I was able to take the lesson from that and apply it to myself. And also that's what I help my athletes with is like, you don't have to micromanage every little thing because that also takes away from like the absolute surprise that the universe can give you. And like the universe loves when you trust and detach and let go, and you're like, you know what, I have this desire, I have this vision, I'm honed in on it, and I don't care how it happens. I'm open to receiving however it comes about. And so that was one of the biggest lessons that I just wanted to touch upon, because you talked about like controlling every aspect. That was one of the biggest lessons that I got from missing out on an Olympic team.
I really enjoy the synchronicity of this conversation, because what I'm hearing is that you surrendered. You surrendered to your life, and you surrendered to whatever outcome was going to happen was what was meant to happen, instead of trying to control everything to get a certain outcome, or just like you said, you know, trying to get a certain PR, or, you know, master that lift. That by surrendering to the moment, surrendering to your life, it allowed things to unfold in ways that you probably couldn't have thought were going to happen if you were able to control everything the way that you wanted it to. And every Wednesday, I lead a somatic breathwork daily practice on my Instagram, and I go live for a period of time and take people through. And in my morning practice every Wednesday, I open myself up to what message needs to come through. And surrender was the message that needed to come through today. And it was about surrendering to our life and stop trying to control every single aspect of your life, every single possibility, every single opportunity, every person that is in it, but instead allowing life to just unfold as it's divinely planned. Getting in touch with more of our soul's aspect, and how does it want to actually project our divine life onto us? And what would that actually look like? How can we tap into that and get more in tune with the flow of life, instead of trying to fight the flow of the river and swim against the current when it's trying to take us in one direction that is more in alignment with where our life actually needs to go, versus trying to swim in the opposite direction in the way that we think life should go. So I think it's beautiful at your example of how, when you surrendered to the process, especially just in that one event, surrendering to each individual lift, just showing up for each individual one, not treating it as like you failed on the first one, now the rest of the lift is done. But okay, you failed on one, not a big deal. Let's go and see how it pans out in the next one, and then how it pans out in the next one. And I think that that's like the beauty of surrendering to the process, is it's just showing up. If you just show up for your life and allow it to unfold, that's the beauty and magic of life.
I love that. So I am a huge Dr. Joe Dispenza fan.
Yeah.
I've been to a bunch of his retreats, and what came to mind when you were saying that is, like, can you shorten the refractory period of you having an emotional response? So it's like, okay, we all have emotional reactions to things. If somebody cuts you off in traffic, it might immediately make you really mad, or, you know, might get really frustrated. Can you shorten that to be like, one, tell yourself to change or stop that thought, and be like, you know, that person might be in a rush. They might have their pregnant wife in the passenger seat. Versus letting that fester and make you angry for hours and hours and hours. That turns into days, that turns into weeks, turns into a mood, then a temperament, then that's your personality. And your personality creates your personal reality, Dr. Joe says. Yeah. So what's interesting about like that whole experience is that I was, and it makes it so much more fun. I was able to be, like you said, really present versus trying to control every aspect of it, and surrendering and just allowing for whatever to happen. And I love the perspective that everything happens for a reason. I said that after I didn't make an Olympic team. I tell that to my athletes, so that I think there's a blessing and lesson in every quote unquote adversity. And life would be very boring if we didn't have obstacles to overcome. It wouldn't push us to grow. And like I said, me experiencing blood clots, I mean, that changed who I was to have to overcome that and go within and fight back to make teams. I mean, it made me such a better athlete and person, because it changed, how I thought and how I went about life. I changed even things about, I mean, I was really not, my intuition had told me not to go on this birth control. So then I started to listen to my intuition a lot more because my intuition was correct. And so, it changes you. Those things are good. That, like, I love the saying that pressure makes diamonds. And that's so true. And we get a lot out of, like, just trusting that whatever is happening for our highest good.
Yes, absolutely. I could not agree more. And I want to take a little bit of a rewind and touch on something that you talked about in asking yourself that question of who am I? And who am I beyond just being an athlete, just being your profession, just being your things? And I think that's an important question that all of us have to ask ourselves many times throughout our lives, because it's easy to get lost in, I am my job, or I am my house, or I am my car, or I am all of the material things that I have. Because what happens when we lose those things? We then lose ourselves, because we've become associated with all of the external things in our environment instead of becoming associated with our internal environment. Who are we beyond our thoughts, beyond our feelings, beyond our emotions, beyond our material possessions? Who is the one that's even viewing all of these thoughts and things like that? And this has been a contemplation of mine for a very, very long time now. Of every time I sit for meditation, it's more of trying to go beyond the thoughts, really sitting in that observer position and continuing to ask myself, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? And that answer has continually changed over the years as I've uncovered more and more aspects of myself, as I've uncovered more and more of the stories that I've told myself of who I was. And many of those stories have changed as I've started to realize, just as you noted, as Dr. Joe Dispenza is, our personality creates our personal reality. Well, if your personality changes, then so does your personal reality. So that, in a way, is taking us a little bit away from that surrendering, because we do have the conscious ability to change those stories. And if we can change those stories, then we can change our personality. And then by changing our personality, we change our personal reality. But then, for me at least, it's about this continued process of trying to manifest what we want to manifest, but then surrendering once we've allowed that manifestation to go out into the universe, and surrendering to the how that is going to manifest. And I think that's one area where a lot of people get really hung up when it comes to visualization and manifestation, is that they're trying to manifest it in a very narrow, particular way. But the universe doesn't work in particulars. It works in, how is it going to be the easiest to alter all of the energies that are around us, all of the people, all of the situations, all of the circumstances, to allow that thing to manifest. And most of the time it manifests very differently than how we would actually think it's going to manifest.
Totally. And I just want to touch on how you said that, like, you're continually asking, who am I, and how your beliefs have shifted. And it's interesting because we also take on beliefs from the collective, from our parents, from, whoever we've been surrounded with. So sometimes, like, so I'm currently trying to call in abundance, I am currently calling in abundance into my life. And a lot of the beliefs that I have were, quote unquote, given to me. I have taken them on from other people. And I'm like, why do I feel this way about abundance and money and just job and career? Like, I have all of these beliefs and I'm like, I don't even know where they came from. And, like, why do I feel that way? And so I think it's really important to, like you said, to have that self-examination of, like, well, whose thought really is this? and that can also be mood. So sometimes, like, if you feel really just in a crummy mood for no reason, sometimes that's not yours, because we are all connected and we're connected into the collective. Sometimes you're expressing an energy that isn't actually yours. And the same is true for those beliefs and those stories, which is why it's really important to do that self-examination and ask those questions. And the best time to do it, like you said, is in meditation or a place where you're not distracted. It's so easy. We're in a very connected world these days. And even just to take time to go for a walk, the no devices, walk outside. I love that. That's a really good one. Because then you're allowing those like ideas to come to you. I get revelations all of the time in meditations. And I think that's huge to do that. And the other part about like the not controlling the how and the surprise of the universe doesn't like particulars. I think that, so like the really awesome thing about visualization and manifestation and creation is that we can have like this idea in mind. Like we're given ideas and desires for a reason. And it's because we are meant to experience them. Are you able to allow it is like the big difference between actually experiencing it and just wanting it, right? Yeah. And so I think being able to keep yourself in a vibration of where you're open to receive, because if you're one of the things that has also shifted for me was like being in a vibration of wanting something. If you're wanting, then you're always going to be in that position of wanting this thing. And so that's what I'm working on with the abundance, because that's like currently the journey that I'm on, because I've sorted it out in other areas of my life and not that one, because I haven't sorted out just yet how to maintain this vibration of having and being worthy of that. And so that's just the journey that I'm currently on. But that's true for any sort of manifestation and desire, is that like if you're coming from this place of wanting, it's a place that's separate. That's what you're going to continually receive. So can you bring yourself to be in the position of knowing what that feels like and feeling the feelings in your body, like somatically, like you're saying, of what does this feel like? What emotions and experiences does this bring for me to be there? Because that's the only way that you're going to be able to attract it. For me, it wasn't until I was able to see myself as being on the World Cup team for skeleton that I was on the World Cup team. For the longest time, I was like, I think I'm good enough to be up there, but I just don't quite think I'm deserving of that. And so I would be just outside of making the World Cup team. And I mean, like it was crazy. It was hundredths of a second. And until I was like, I am a winner, I'm the best in the country. And it's like brainwashing in a way. You're telling yourself, because you want to groove those pathways. For the most part, I'm 36 years old. I have 36 years of some of this programming about how money is hard and you got to work really hard your whole life and you shouldn't be in debt and all of these stories. And so for me to overcome that, I've got to groove these new pathways. I've got to continually create these new stories and repeat them over and over again. And it sounds like it's ridiculous because it's so easy. That's what we need to do. We get the opportunity to create these new pathways. We want to fire and wire these thought patterns and these stories that are the stories that we want to experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that whole process of coming back to the why. Like I love that you touched on, that wanting is, when we want something, we are in a state of lack because we're wanting something more than what we already have. And the more we stay in that state of lack, the more we're going to stay in that state of lack. So it's really about, and what has really helped in my own personal practice is being grateful for what I have in this moment, being grateful for the life that I have, that everything that in it, all the beautiful people, my family, my home, all of it, the more I can be grateful for what I have right now, the more capacity I'm going to have to be grateful for the things that continue to come into my life. And so it's really learning to ingrain that gratitude more than the want and desire for more, that then we actually bring in more to want and desire because we are already grateful for what we have. It's this weird irony that I feel like society has done a really good job of training us not to think in this way,
Yes.
to have this focus, using the law of attraction. If you just focus on the things that you want, then they'll just come to you. But that's only part of the story. The whole truth is that you have to become aligned with the feeling of what it would be to already have that thing.
Yes.
Not continuing to project it into the future of one day I will have this, one day I will have this. Just as your example, changing that mindset to I am a top performing athlete. I am the best in the United States. So I deserve to have this spot. That in and of itself changes the felt sense of that story, versus replaying the story of I'm going to continue to try as hard as I possibly can to prove that I am worthy.
Yes. It's
you're always going to be trying to prove it then.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I love the piece about gratitude. I think that's so important to be appreciative of the things that we have, especially because we're bombarded with, commercialized things and advertisements and all of that stuff. So it's easy to get into the state of wanting. But if we're able to recognize the things that we have, those things then also multiply. And I think that's so powerful. I'm glad you touched on that. So I have the Savage Tenants. So my nickname's the Savage Meglet. And so the Savage Tenants are structure, awareness, visualization, affirmations, gratitude, and execution. And gratitude is one of the tenets because, like you said, if I am appreciative of the things that I have, then those things appreciate themselves. They appreciate, they increase. And it's so important to have a gratitude practice. I have a question for you about the breath work that you do. So what I found, like I said, huge Dr. Joe fan. There's some breath work that he incorporates within his meditations. And he does a lot of, it's almost like, I don't want to say staged breath work, but when you're doing like a deep inhale and you're taking it basically from your perineum up to your pineal gland, and you're squeezing to help move that cerebral spinal fluid to go around your brain and into the pineal gland and all of that. What I actually have found with another one of my Dr. Joe friends is that I don't need to do that. I don't need to do the like squeezing and stuff. And that I experience that euphoria and that connection without all of that. And just through doing breath work. However, I have a ton of resistance to doing the breath work. So I'm sure that you've experienced that with some of your clients. So I'm wondering what your recommendation is and your perspective as to why that is. I'm guessing it's because that's the work that I should be doing or I get to do. But yeah, I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
It really comes down to that which we fear the most is our medicine. That which we have the most resistance to is what we need to lean into further.
Totally.
And with breath work, it's all about surrendering. It's about surrendering to the intelligence that exists in your body. And that is one area where I have noticed some people struggle a little bit with breath work, is that letting go, is that trusting in the body's own inner intelligence. And the body will never make you relive something that's just going to cause more trauma. The body just wants two things: growth and homeostasis. It wants to continue to expand in life. It wants to continue to have more experiences, while at the same time maintaining a state of balance. And so it's this constant ebb and flow of growing and then coming back into balance, growing and then coming back into balance. And that's really with the type of breath work that I do called somatic breath work. It's all about coming back into the body. And so in the first half, we tune into the body with our breath and see what we're still holding on to that no longer serves us. What are we still holding on to that were stories that were given to us, that are patterns that we're replaying in our subconscious that don't actually belong to us. We don't actually believe in them, but because we've been carrying them for so long, they continually run in the background. So we can use the breath to clear that stuff out of our body. And then in the second half, we switch the breathing pattern to a little bit more calm, more regulating breath pattern, to where it allows you to call the parts of yourself back in that may have dissociated during times of stress or trauma, of calling in new ways of being, of calling in the feeling of love, calling in the feeling of gratitude, and getting more in alignment with how we actually want to show up in the world based upon our view of who we are as a person, versus showing up in the world based upon how our parents have told us that we are, how our friends and family have told us that we are, how society has told us that we are, but really getting in tune with who we truly are and how we actually want to show up in the world.
I love that. I think especially with having a lot of people experiencing a lot of stress, a lot of cortisol, that totally throws your body out of homeostasis. And that sounds so powerful. So I'm gonna have to get some lessons and coaching from you there, because I'm super interested, and I incorporate it, but not as regularly. Meditation's very easy for me, right? I enjoy it. It's something I do a lot, and I have not really incorporated like a true breathwork practice consistently. And I know that there's a lot to be unlocked there. And so I really appreciate that answer, and how it does. It allows you to get that perspective from having a lot of presence too. Like, it creates that presence and awareness to be like, what am I feeling in my body? What am I storing here that's not serving me? I mean, I'm sure a tremendous amount of physical healing takes place doing that type of practice, just from moving that old stored energy. So that's really amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I love using the analogy. My background is in the tech industry, and so I love using the analogy of we are like our smartphones. And we all have apps on our smartphones that we never use. We all have apps that are just taking up space, or we have apps that maybe are a little glitchy and they don't work quite well because they need to be updated. And so that's really what breathwork is like, is it allows us to go into our iOS, our internal operating system, and choose what apps do we want to delete? What apps do we need to update? What apps do we need to download and install into our life so that we can run better, we can perform better, we can operate better, and we can operate from a more aligned place, no longer carrying the things that aren't helping us to continue to grow, aren't helping us to maintain that state of homeostasis. And in doing so, we begin to broaden our window of tolerance. And that window of tolerance is how much stress are we able to deal with. Some of us have a very narrow window of tolerance where it just takes the smallest thing to send us into fight or flight, to where now we no longer are consciously in control of our actions. By expanding that window of tolerance through doing challenging things like breath work, as we begin to broaden that window of tolerance, we expand our capacity to handle stress. We expand our capacity to what life can throw at us, to where we can maintain that conscious ability to choose how we are going to respond, not just how we're going to react.
I love that. I know. Can you imagine using like the iPhone 5 software still? It'd be rough. Yes,
it would
yeah,
be.
yeah. That's what a lot of us
be.
are doing. We're operating on like the 10-year-old version of ourselves.
Exactly. And for some of us, especially those, and I've touched on in many of the episodes addiction and things like that, where when we get locked into a certain pattern or a certain way of being, we get locked into that age when that pattern started. So many of us that are running patterns that we adopted when we were children, we are still reacting based upon that age in which we started that programming. And that's why sometimes, I can speak of my own experience of having certain reactions in certain situations where I'm practically throwing a temper tantrum.
Yeah.
Totally not relevant to the situation at all. But that's where my body's natural autonomic nervous system wanted to respond.
Wow.
Through breathwork sessions where I was able to relive those experiences from a third eye perspective, I was able to see the intelligence of that pattern in that time, but then also to see it how that pattern has become maladaptive in my life. It's no longer actually helping me like it did in that very first instance. Instead, my autonomic nervous system, which for those that aren't familiar, the autonomic nervous system is the two sides of our nervous system, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic, the fight or flight and the rest and digest. And if we are not consciously in control of our nervous system, if we are not operating from a state of balance, then that nervous system automatically, just as the name states, autonomic, it automatically chooses how it's going to respond based upon your previous experiences.
Wow.
And so if you don't change that response pattern, it's just going to continue to replay based upon the previous information, not the information that's based upon the current situation. And so that's really where the power of breath work, the power of meditation, the power of story work, like you participate in, Megan, of being able to change these stories so we can then change how we are responding to every situation based upon the information that's right in front of us.
That's amazing. And it's crazy because then it's like the body is telling the mind what to do, right? You like that energy is stored in the body and the body's informing the mind. And so while you think that you're a conscious being, you end up losing that. Like you said, you just like throw a temper tantrum and you lose that control a bit, that ability to respond in a way, because it's then the body has embodied the body has embodied that feeling so much that it tells the mind how to react. And that's so interesting. Yeah, really, really powerful stuff there.
It is. And really all of these modalities, I think, are gaining popularity in this time the way that they are because of, for lack of a better term, how screwed up our world has become. I don't know about you, but I notice it in my wife and I. We spent 9 months living in Virginia, and the mentality there in Virginia was very different than what we had become used to in Washington State, where here in Washington, it's very rare if you walk by somebody in the grocery store that they're going to smile and say hi. Whereas if you walk through a grocery store in Virginia, somebody's going to stop you. They're going to say hi. They're going to want to have a conversation. They're going to be really kind and polite. And it's just this very different mentality. And yet I feel like more and more of the country is becoming just like Washington, where it's like, just focus on yourself, stay in your lane, don't ruffle anybody's feathers, be super politically correct. But that's not the way that we were meant to live. We were meant to live of being expressive beings, of living in community, of helping each other out. And so I think that's one of the things that these practices are bringing us back to, is this sense of community, of helping one another to work through the challenges, of being there for one another in those hard moments. And I don't know about you, Megan, but that's one of the reasons why I love so much of being a space holder and being there for people in their challenging moments. Is it gives me this sense of coming back to that community, of coming back to, I think, the way that we've always meant to live.
I think that is what is so attractive about like being of service, because that is also something that we're meant to do. We're meant to be, to serve others and provide, like you said, like that community, that love. I feel like that is something that is coming back around, like operating from a place of love. And that's also why authenticity is so attractive. When you see somebody who's really, really comfortable in their skin, they're very genuine. They may or may not have a filter. Like, it's actually very attractive, right? Because you're like, you know what? They are very much themselves. They're comfortable with who they are. They know who they are. And that's also what's so powerful about like all the practices that you touched on, is that it gets you to know who you are. And you're also better able to establish boundaries. You're able to say yes to the things that are going to support you and push you to the places that you want to go. And you're able to also say no to the things that aren't in support of you, that are bringing you down or lowering your vibration. And I think the reason why people are so like tunnel vision, I got to say to myself, is because they don't really know who they are. And then they also feel like, oh, I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. And if somebody asks me to do something, I don't have a backbone enough to be like, no. So it is certainly an interesting time. And the more that people are working remotely, as cool as it is, because it allows like the freedom of travel and things like that, what I struggle with, and because I coach remotely, is that like there's not a community aspect, which is why I still am into fitness and I'm still into training, because that's where I find that community aspect. And that is really, that's where we came from. Like you said, we were all tribes and surviving.
Yeah.
And that true, what makes that so powerful, or what like the tribe aspect powerful, is because it's like true, authentic, strong connections where people are able to be vulnerable and be authentic. And I feel like today people don't feel like they are safe to be vulnerable, right? And so it's really powerful to be of service and be like coaching others, to be of service, to give them a place where they're able to like, just like take a deep breath, for lack of a better word.
Yep.
And be themselves and open up and just like release that stuff that they've been carrying.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you touch on that authenticity piece of really just allowing your true expression to come out into the world, because the more each and every one of us can be truly authentic in our expression, it just gives everybody else around us that permission slip to also be authentic, to really show up the way that they showed up as a kid. I really believe that we knew ourselves so well when we were little. We knew how to express ourselves. We knew the things that we liked. We knew the things that we didn't like. We didn't have these perceptions of, oh, well, I'm from this area, so I should like this, or I shouldn't like this. And we begin to should on ourselves a lot as we get older and older and older, and begin to manipulate that expression. We begin to bottle it up a little bit. We begin to start to say, well, I don't want to really show up this way because that might make somebody uncomfortable. But shouldn't that really be what we all do? Like, lean into the discomfort. If something makes you uncomfortable, there is a lesson there. There is something for you in that discomfort. And it's one thing that I always share at the beginning when I'm giving my introduction in a breathwork session is the first half is meant to be uncomfortable. Like, if you are comfortable in your breathing pattern in the first half, you are not leaning in enough. The breath is meant to push you. I am here to push you and push that comfort zone, because once we get out of that comfort zone, that's where the magic really begins to take place.
That totally echoes like the bit about the struggle and the obstacles, and that's what, again, makes life super exciting. And do you have kids?
I have 5 fur kids.
Fur kids, still really good. So I don't have kids, but I have nieces, and the oldest was definitely just a light bringer of a child. And so she's 5 now. And I remember my mom, I was visiting her in Florida, and my mom was there. And I had just left to go home from there. And she, her name's Violet. She sat there and she closed her eyes. And my mom's like, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "I'm sending Megan love." And I like, it's just, nobody taught her that, you know what I mean? Like, she just did that on her own. And she's very, very intuitive and connected. And that's just how we come to the planet. And so I'm like, I love being around her and her younger sister. They teach me so much about that connection to source and just like how authentic they are. They're very much themselves, and yeah, a lot to be learned from young souls.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I have 3 nieces that I just a couple of weeks ago watched for a week while my sister and brother-in-law were on vacation. And it's so fascinating to just see at how different they are when I compare myself at their age. And, I like to use analogies a lot. And it's kind of like if you think about cars, like I'm a model from 1984 and my nieces are models from, the early and mid 2000s. They're going to operate very, very differently than I am going to operate. Just naturally from the get-go, because they have already received all of the information that we received throughout our lifetimes. And it's like that is the gift of, I think, being a parent is you are giving your life experience through your DNA to your child, starting them off from a very, very different point than where you started off. So naturally, that should mean that they're going to have access to greater expansion of information comparatively to what we were when we were growing up. And so just like how idiotic would it be not to learn from the wisdom of children, not to learn from the wisdom of their natural responses? When they throw a temper tantrum, they're throwing a temper tantrum because they have too much energy in their body and they need to move it out. They naturally know how to do it. They naturally know how to express the energy when the pressure gets too much in their system. We as adults, on the other hand, we say, oh, it's getting a little bit too much. I don't want to feel this, so I'm going to push it away. Or I'm going to mask it with a substance. I'm not going to allow myself to feel it because either now is not the right time, or I'm not comfortable with this feeling that's coming up, so I don't want to deal with it. But the reality is, we heal it through feeling it. When we allow that emotion to come through, and emotions are just energy in motion, they're meant to move through us. So when we allow it to move through us in the moment, just like children do, instead of bottling it up and either never coming back to it or coming back to it way later, so we no longer have the context for why we created that energetic blockage in the first place. This is really where I believe that all of this work lies, whether it's breath work, whether it's story work, whatever the modality is. It's all about learning to tap into the energy within our body and what wants to move through in that moment to help us to continue that growth and homeostasis like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. Oh, that's so powerful. I love how you phrase that. I also like, I thought you were going to be like, I'm a Model T. That was funny. Not quite that old. Not quite that old.
Not quite that old. Not like I'd look pretty good if I was that old.
Yeah. But I love how you describe that, because I haven't thought of it in that way before. That, like, obviously we absorb just from our ancestors. Like, there's so much that's passed on to us energetically and patterns and all of that. And I haven't thought of it in the way that you described, how like they're using that. They come from a different like baseline of intelligence and understanding. So I love the car analogy. It makes so much sense. And like, it's a new model. It operates differently. It's got new features.
Yeah, exactly. They're not stuck with a cassette deck in their car. Instead, they've got Apple CarPlay and navigation and like get to have all of the new fun technology. And, that is in and of itself is a whole different conversation of, how kids come into this world and they already know how to use the technology of this time. Nobody really has to teach them how to use it. Instead, now you have people of the older generations that struggle with the technology of this day. And I posted recently from several of the different podcasts where we've talked about technology, but technology beyond the terms of electronic technology or technology of our modern day, but like language can be a technology. Breath work can be a technology. Our body is a form of technology. And so the more that we can expand that definition of what is actual technology, the more we can begin to tap into other areas that will allow us to continue that expansion.
So I would say that the greatest form of technology that we have is our own brain. It's like the best supercomputer there is. And I love that analogy, super powerful. It's interesting because there's a lot of people who I think are like on the cusp of getting this information, right? That of like getting the power to come back to them. And that, like you said, that the words that they're using, their own body, like you can heal yourself. You don't have to put the power outside of you. While there's certainly a time and place for things like that, and emergency rooms and trauma and things like that, there's certainly a time and place for that. Is there a need to have a pill for every sort of thing? After my experience with birth control, I totally changed my viewpoint on that. Like, okay, do I really need these things? So, to just like even touch on the birth control bit, that whole messaging was like, you should take this external thing to prevent you from having this natural thing in your body from occurring. And you're powerless. Like the messaging was really like, you're powerless. And a woman could, if she wanted to, if she learns about her body. So like the power again is taken out of you. And if a woman takes the time to know her body and know, like, I'm at this point in my cycle, like you don't need this thing outside of you. And it's just a really interesting time to be alive, because it's cool to see that transformation of people taking their power back and realizing like, my body, I can heal myself from things. I can create this life that I dreamed of. I can watch the words that I'm saying. My mind can visualize something, and my body doesn't know the difference between something real and imagined. I can draw this experience to me. It's really, really cool to see that type of stuff taking hold, and these different modalities, like you're saying, serve as avenues for that to occur and to spread and just like raise the consciousness of the planet. It's a really, really amazing time to be alive. As chaotic as it seems at times, it's super, super cool to be around for it. I'm here for it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think this is such an amazing time for us to find ourselves in, because it's this merger of our modern way of living, while all of this ancient wisdom is starting to come back and is starting to get integrated. And I think our true future is in that integration, the integration of our modern technology, balancing the ancient wisdoms of indigenous cultures all over the world, where I truly believe that indigenous cultures are way ahead of even us in the scientific and Western culture, because science is just starting to prove everything that indigenous cultures have been saying for thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes me contemplate sometimes of like, where did we go wrong? Where did we think that we knew better than all of these cultures that lived in harmony with our planet for thousands and thousands of years, that now within a handful of generations, we have taken the planet from being a very thriving environment to somewhat hostile, to where, the oceans are being polluted, the land is being polluted, the soil doesn't have the same nutrient content that it used to have, because growing practices have changed so much. We're eating food from halfway across the world instead of eating food that's local to us, that's within season, that our body naturally wants and craves for. So I am really, really excited and very hopeful for the future of our planet, the future of our society, because as more and more people, Megan, like yourself and like myself, continue to dive into these practices and continue to ask that question of who am I and how can I be of service to the collective whole, That's what's going to move us into this, new golden age, if you will.
I totally agree. It's very, very interesting. I love being like when I just even think of who I was 10 years ago, for example, 12 years ago at the start of my skeleton career, I was just a completely different person, like totally different, unrecognizable person. My boyfriend lives in England, and we've been together for a little over a year now, and when I tell him about like my past self, he's like, I cannot even imagine you like this. Like I had so much negative self-talk. I was very, very shy. It was just, you could see it like on my face, right? I just carried myself totally different. And he's just like, I can't even imagine you being like that. And so it, like you said, it gives you that hope and that optimism for not only what's possible for ourselves, but just the planet as a whole. I'm so intrigued to see what like my nieces are able to accomplish in their lifetime, and just being able to come in and have this type of knowledge and influence. When I've gone to some of these Dr. Joe retreats, the youngest girl that I saw was like, I think 7 years old. And I'm like, man, a part of me is like, man, I wish I learned this when I was 7, right? But then my life would have been totally different. And and I wasn't meant to know it at that time. But it's so cool that these kids have that, and that they're able to walk the planet differently with that knowledge. And one of the kids got up on stage. I think he was 11 or 12 years old. And he told this story when I think about me as an 11-year-old standing up on a stage in front of 1,500 people, like I would have been like, lips zipped shut, right? And he was up there telling the story of how he was able to heal himself from debilitating asthma to the point of where he couldn't even laugh. He had asthma so bad. He would have such like asthma attacks. And he told the story of how he was able to visualize and tap into this other future version of himself and throw his inhaler away. And I'm like, man, that is crazy, because he's telling this story, and he's also changing the perspective of people who are generations older than him, right? When they sit there and listen to this story, they are like, wow, okay, that's crazy. This 11-year-old is able to do that. So it's so cool to witness. And like I said, just being able to be a part of it and make a small contribution it's really rewarding. I just absolutely love connecting with people like yourself, Adam, and hearing about how you're of service to others and just elevating the planet. I just love it.
Yeah. I love that story because it really shows the importance of planting seeds, of sharing your truth, of sharing your story with people, and planting the seeds of information, the seeds of hope, the seeds of you and I and every single person have the ability inside of ourselves to heal anything and everything that we could possibly deal with. As long as we learn to take that power back, to stop placing that power in other people's hands, to stop expecting a doctor to know our body better than ourselves.
When I experienced the blood clots, I went to 5 different doctors before someone was like, okay, you should go get a CAT scan because I think you have blood clots in your lungs. I told the same story over and over again, a lesson in advocating for yourself. And had I listened to the first doctor, who was just like, meh, here's an inhaler, then maybe take an antibiotic, let's see what happens. I knew intuitively that was not the answer. And I was able to like be persistent because I knew that wasn't the correct thing. But the scary part was, like you said, this doctor doesn't know more about me than I do. And and this should be something that like when you say, I'm having problems breathing, I started a birth control. It should be like ding, 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 ding. Oh, okay. This is definitely the cause. Like that is how prevalent this is. It's very prevalent that is a known cause. Yet they were like, meh. And so, but like if the more that you read about it, it's like, that's a no brainer. Right. And so the people outside of us, your body knows so much, the innate intelligence, like you said, in your body, in your mind, your intuition, your higher self has all of the answers. And the challenge today that we have the opportunity to really, really dive into is to make space for that voice to become louder versus the voices on the external. So that's like, because we're being pulled in so many different directions, that's why it's so important, like you said, to lean in, to set time aside, to meditate, to be away from devices, have digital detoxes, to read, do breath work, to do like whatever practice calls to you, to just give yourself that space, because you'll find so much clarity and wisdom by just asking yourself the question. Like you'll be surprised by, like you said, I ask myself the question when I go into my practice. The answer will come to you. It may not be that same moment and it may not be the same day, but it will come.
You touched on that. And this morning in my morning practice, in my morning meditation, I always sit down and I have this intention of I'm open to receive the message I'm meant to see, the message I'm meant to hear, and the message I'm meant to feel. To just put out that intention of I'm open to receiving whatever message it is that I need to hear, feel, and see in that moment to help me just continue to take that one next step. And this morning, that message wasn't coming right away. And so the voice in my head was like, okay, well, what is the message? Like, when is it going to come? How long do I need to sit here? And, it's that inner dialogue starts happening. And I've now developed this process of when that dialogue starts happening of just telling myself, I am not these thoughts. I am not these thoughts. I am not these thoughts. And then leaning into that inner stillness and just allowing yourself to be in that moment. Not trying to force that message to come, not trying to force anything to happen, but just surrendering to that moment. And the more you surrender to that, all of a sudden that message comes right up and it's clear as day. And there's no questioning of what that message is. So, Megan, I'd be really interested to know of how have you continued to lean more and more into yourself, to know more of yourself and really tune more into your body?
So again, like the meditation is huge, huge for me. I've been to, in September and October, I went to 2 weeks straight of Dr. Joe retreats. They were back to back. And the first week I had so much resistance. I was like, I'm having a bad week, my mind was telling me that. There's no such thing as a bad meditation. There's always things that we learn from them. So, and it was quite the process. And so, as I mentioned, I was like, okay, there's definitely something here with the breath work. So I'm like pushing myself to embody that more and dive deeper into that practice, because I do feel so much resistance to it. Once I like get going and have done some of even longer, I've done a couple of really, really long breathwork practices, and they're so, so powerful. So it's like when I do it, I know I receive a benefit from it. It's like committing to the consistency of it. Because for some reason I'll be like, oh, I just really don't want to do this. But it's so powerful. So for me, it's like it is expanding those types of practices, like you said, and leaning into that and connecting as much as I can to my higher self. And so right now it's trying to create a abundance in my life in all facets. Abundance means more than just financial wealth, but I'm open to receiving that too. So a lot of it has to do with meditation and practicing what I preach my clients, because there's times where I don't feel like getting up and going to the gym, or I don't feel like meditating, and I don't feel like doing this practice, or I want to eat a chocolate candy bar. Like, there's things. So can I stay in alignment with the message that I'm sending, and which goes to being like authentic and genuine, like we mentioned before. And then as far as like really getting into my body, I've also done some of the cold plunging, and I did a winter sport for over a decade. So that is also something I am resistant to. I'm like, I am so done being cold. I've been talking about I'm in Connecticut at the moment. I've been talking about moving to Florida next year. So I'm like, ooh, this cold practice it's a good one, but I have a lot of resistance to that too. So yeah, leaning into these things that I have a lot of resistance to doing. I've always found really rewarding. At first, I really didn't like meditation, and it totally changed who I was as a person. So I know that these types of practices will do the same.
It's, I think, beautiful to lean into those things that we do have resistance to. And I couldn't agree with you more. It's in the days where like I don't want to go to CrossFit, and the days that I show up when I don't want to go are the days that I always feel so much better afterwards. And I not only feel better in my body, but I feel better in my consciousness. Like I feel better about myself because I pushed through that resistance instead of giving into that resistance.
And you were able to be in alignment with like this agreement that you made to yourself, right? So recently I was at the gym, and I was I'm training totally different now, which is very, very cool because I trained for performance all of the time. So now I'm like, well, I can train to look good now if I want to. So, but I had a couple of more sets to do. I can't remember the exercise in particular. I think it might have been like barbell hip thrust. And I was like, I'm just done. It was leg press. And so I got a PR on the leg press, and I was supposed to do like a drop set. And I'm like, I just don't feel like doing this. I just don't have it in me today. And I was like ready to pack it up and go home. And I ended up finishing, and I felt so much better for doing so, because it wasn't that it took like this insane amount of effort to just finish. It was just all in my mind that I was like, I don't want to do this. I want to go home. Like I want to get something to eat. It wasn't that I wasn't able to. It wasn't that I was totally, absolutely shot physically that I couldn't do it. And so it's so powerful to lean in those times. And like, there's obviously going to be moments where it would be beneficial to rest, right? If you like hurt something, okay, then sure. However, it's so powerful to commit to those things that you made an agreement with yourself on. And that's how you build that trust within yourself. And I think that also builds your intuition as well. Because if you're like, I committed to this thing and I'm going to do it, and I followed through and committed, versus, oh, I snoozed my alarm and I just let myself stay in bed for another couple of hours, you feel very differently about yourself. And we want to cultivate a really positive and loving relationship to ourselves. And if you did choose to snooze, then it's still important to have that relationship where you're like, I am okay with the fact that I snoozed my alarm. I prioritized rest and recovery today, and tomorrow I will get back on the horse, and I will do it tomorrow. So I still side with that. It's important to push through. However, either way that you go, like the way that you talk to yourself in those moments is so important. And being your own hype man, I find like almost taking another voice, because like you said, we're an observer a lot of the time. These thoughts that come through, we're the observer. So if you can be like, I find it helpful to talk in third person. So like, okay, Megan, we're going to get up and we're going to go to the gym today. Like I find that to be really helpful, because you're just like taking this other perspective that is like another version of you, like your higher self talking to you, or your best friend. It creates a very different energy when you're able to talk to yourself in like a third person.
Yeah, I think that having grace with yourself is
Mm,
so important to, we all are going to have days where we don't uphold what it is we were going to say we were going to do. But I think the difference is when we can show up for ourselves in a graceful and compassionate way on those days is what
mm,
helps them not to repeat in the future. But
yes.
when we talk down to ourselves, when we beat ourselves up because we didn't do something that we said we were going to do, and then, we start to become defeated within ourselves, we are actually solidifying that pattern instead of
Yes.
creating a new neurological pathway that can take us in a different direction through giving ourselves that grace and compassion of like, okay, today we didn't make it to the gym. That's all right. We'll make it tomorrow. If you don't make it tomorrow, okay, then you make it the next day. And you keep putting that priority in honoring where you're at in the moment. And maybe you didn't do that thing because you didn't need to do that thing that day. And what if by not doing that thing that day, it opened up for a new opportunity to present itself into our life that then brought us in a new direction? Again,
Mm,
full circle coming back to that whole surrendering thing of surrendering
definitely.
to how life wants to unfold instead of insisting that it has to be in a certain way. Now, I want to make something clear though, listeners. I'm not saying that to just stop putting in effort. That is not what I mean by surrendering. Surrendering means to being open to what wants to happen in the moment and what wants to unfold. It doesn't mean that you continue to make it okay that you're not going to the gym. We still have to put in action. We still have to put in effort. We still have to take a part in our life, not just take a back seat and say, okay, life, unfold however you're going to unfold, and I'm just going to do whatever. That's not what I'm trying to say here. What I am trying to instill is that still be that active participant in your life, but also be open to life unfolding in the way that it is meant to unfold, not how we think it should unfold.
I love that. I think inspired action is super, super important.
Yes.
This reminded me, this happened literally 2 days ago. I had this conversation with my father. I was like, man, I am sleeping so much more than normal right now. Like I want to be waking up earlier, but I'm just so tired. I'm so exhausted. I was sleeping so much. And he was like, well, then your body must need more sleep. Like, very matter of fact. And I was like, yeah, you're right. Okay. So at first I was like judging myself because I'm like, oh, I'm going to wake up earlier and I'm going to have this like really solid morning routine before I get to my meetings for the day. And I was just so tired, like abnormally tired. Um, and I initially, you start to judge yourself, and I'm like, well, man, I snoozed my alarm and I slept there, and I'm like, what the heck is going on? And like you said, having that grace where I was like, well, my body must have needed that. I had a really like adventurous week, showing my boyfriend's parents around New York City for the first time. They've never been to the United States. Had Thanksgiving. I mean, driving all over the place, hours in the car. It was just a lot going on, and so my body finally got a moment to be still and was like, oh, okay, we're going to sleep. So I could have been super, super judgmental. And luckily, my father gave me this realization to be like, well, you must have needed it. And I'm like, I did, actually. I really did. Because on top of that, I was still training. I was still like very clean eating and all of this stuff. So my body needed it. And it made me feel better to do that rather than, like you said, guilt trip yourself and be like, oh my God, I should have been doing this. I should have been doing that. I was like, okay, I let myself sleep, and tomorrow I will wake up earlier. Right. So yeah, that grace
Yeah.
is very, very powerful. And it might take your father saying a really obvious statement to you for it to come around.
Yeah, definitely a good case in point that, our body will always give us what we need, not
Mm,
necessarily what we want.
definitely. I love that.
So, Megan, I would love to take the opportunity to ask you the embrace and expand signature question. What was the one thing that you had to embrace in your life in order to expand into the person you are today?
For me, it was definitely to embrace discomfort, obstacles and quote unquote not ideal situations. I experienced a slew of narcissistic relationships. I had my experience with blood clots. I had lots of moments of failure. I didn't make an Olympic team. These are all things that were very, very challenging at the time. Yet they made me who I am. They gave me that opportunity to be like, why am I attracting these narcissistic partners? What is it about me that is bringing these people into my life? Why do I feel like I deserve this treatment? Why do I feel like I should take this birth control? So it was, and like not making an Olympic team, I was in such a better headspace by having those experiences to be like, this is a blessing in disguise. I was able to really reframe it very much more quickly because I had embraced those obstacles and challenges, and they certainly have made me who I am. And as difficult as it can be in the moment, I try to remind myself of that. I try to remind myself like this struggle is good for me. it's up leveling me in some way. I'm learning something about myself to grow and expand.
Yeah, it's such a wonderful answer. So, what would be one last piece of advice that she would like to offer the listeners if they really enjoyed what you had to say and really want to dive more into some of these practices that we touched on?
So my advice would be that you are so, so powerful and you have everything that you need inside of you. You are not lacking it. You might be blocking it. And there are ways to overcome that. Certainly, Adam is certainly one of those avenues. I do story work and mindset work. And if you want to reach out to me, I'm always available on Instagram. That's the best way to get a hold of me. I'm at the Savage Meglet. And I want everybody to know that they have the power within them. And there's just so much that we are capable. It's like beyond our comprehension.
I love that. Such great information and advice, Megan. And so, as always, listeners, I will have Megan's information in the show notes below so you can easily get a hold of her. Definitely follow her on Instagram. There's some very inspiring posts from many of the other podcasts that she's been a part of. So definitely check that out. If you do have any more questions, definitely reach out to her and, pick her brain. Story work is definitely an important thing.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Adam.
Well, thanks again, listeners, for being here on another episode of the Embrace and Expand podcast. As always, if you could help the podcast continue to grow by sharing it on your social media platforms. If you're catching this on YouTube, make sure to hit that subscribe button, click the bell notification so you're informed on the next time a video gets posted. So thanks again for being here, and I'll catch you on the next one.